My name is Lena Carter, and I'm 42. For 10 years, I thought I had made my peace with my mother's absence. I thought I knew the whole story, that all her secrets were buried with her. Turns out I was wrong. I was so wrong. That fragile peace I'd built for myself, it shattered the day my mom's old high school teacher, a man I hadn't seen in 20 years, put her diary in my hands and said 5 words that changed everything. You must read this. And opening that little leather book didn't just unravel a secret, it blew up my entire life. It revealed a betrayal so deep it poisoned every single memory I had and put me on a path to a cold, calculated revenge I never would have thought I had in me. Before I get into the secret I've been carrying, do me a quick favor and subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and drop a comment guessing what you think the final twist will be. Now, where were we? Right, the beginning of the end. For a decade, my life was just hollow. My mother, Eleanor, wasn't just my mom. She was the sun my whole world orbited around. Her laugh was the soundtrack to my childhood, and her smell of lavender and old books was my ultimate comfort. When cancer took her, it didn't feel like a death. It felt like an extinction. The world went from color to black and white. I was 32, and suddenly I was an orphan in a world that felt cold and completely alien. My father, Robert, just retreated into himself. He became a person I didn't even recognize. He was there in body, but his eyes were vacant. It was like living with a ghost. We'd eat dinner in total silence, the only sound being our forks clinking against the plates. He never, ever said her name. It was like if he didn't say it, she was never really gone. I tried at first, to talk about her, to grieve with him. But he'd just meet me with this quiet, pained look. So eventually I gave up. We became 2 strangers living in the same house, haunted by the memory of a woman we weren't allowed to talk about. The only person who seemed to be thriving in this new, depressing reality was my aunt, Carol, my mother's younger sister. Right after the funeral, Carol just swept in. She took over everything, reorganizing the kitchen, tending to my mom's garden, hosting all the family holidays. "We have to stick together," she'd say, patting my arm a little too hard, her voice dripping with a sweetness that always felt fake. Carol was the complete opposite of my mom. Where my mom was calm and thoughtful, Carol was loud and always putting on a show. She wore these bright, flashy clothes, and her jewelry was so loud you could hear her coming from another room. She practically smothered my father, bringing him food, sorting his mail, basically inserting herself as the new lady of the house. Everyone said how amazing she was, stepping up to take care of her poor brother-in-law and niece. I just nod and smile, but there was always this tight knot in my stomach. Something felt off. It was the possessive way she'd look at my dad, that little glint of triumph in her eye when she sat in my mother's chair at the dinner table. Then things got weird with money. My mother came from old money and was a really smart investor. She always told me she was setting me up for life. "You'll never have to worry, Lena," she'd promise. "Everything I have is for you." But after she died, that money seemed to shrink. When I asked my dad about the inheritance, he got all vague. "Your mother was sick at the end, Lena. Things were more complicated than she told you." And Carol would always jump in. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about money. Your father and I are handling everything." Being taken care of felt like I was being slowly suffocated. They put me on a comfortable, but pretty modest, allowance from a trust they managed. When I wanted to start my own graphic design business, I asked for a lump sum to get it going. They gently denied it. "It's too risky, darling," Carol cooed. "Let us handle the finances." They treated me like a kid, and my mother's promises of independence turned into a cage. I ended up starting my business with my own tiny savings, and I made it work, but no thanks to them. The rift between us just got wider every year, our politeness got thinner, and the resentment just bubbled under the surface. I just accepted that this was my life now, dull, full of unanswered questions, and with this constant feeling that I'd been cheated. I had no idea it was so much worse than I could have imagined. The call came on a Tuesday. A classic gray, drizzly day that pretty much matched how I felt inside. I was sketching a logo, just zoned out, when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but some gut feeling made me pick up. "Hello, is this Lena Carter?" The voice was old and raspy, but there was a familiar warmth to it. "Yes. Who's calling? My name is Arthur Harrison. I'm not sure you remember me. I was your mother's English teacher at Northwood High. I think I taught you for a semester, too. Mr. Harrison. The name hit me like a ton of bricks. He was a legend at our school, the guy with the wild white hair who was so passionate about poetry you couldn't help but love it too. My mom adored him. Mr. Harrison, I said, a real smile forming for the first time all day. Of course, I remember you. How have you been? I'm old Lena, he chuckled, and I'm calling about something unusual. I've been cleaning out my attic, finally, and I found something of your mother's. I held my breath. Something of my mom's. Yes. She gave me a box of her old notebooks after she graduated. Said she'd be back for them, but I guess life got in the way. Most of it was just schoolwork, but there was a personal journal. A diary. Since she's gone, I didn't feel right throwing it out, and I definitely didn't feel right reading it. It belongs with you. A diary? Mom never mentioned a diary. She was a private person, sure, but I thought she told me everything. A strange shiver, half excitement and half dread, ran down my spine. I'd love to have it, I whispered. We agreed to meet at a cafe the next day. I couldn't focus all night. What was in that diary? Teenage crushes? Or something else? That uneasy feeling I'd been carrying for 10 years was back, twisted up in my gut. He was waiting at a corner table, looking older, but his eyes were just as sharp. And there on the table was a small, leather-bound book with a dark green cover, worn smooth over time. It was held shut by a little brass clasp. We made small talk for a few minutes, and then he pushed the book across the table. I packed it away and just forgot about it, he said. She was my brightest student, a remarkable soul. He paused, and his expression got serious. He looked from the diary to me. I don't know what's in there, but a few days after she gave this to me, she called, and she sounded scared. She made me promise I wouldn't give it to anyone but her, or to you if something happened to her. At the time I thought she was just being dramatic. Now, I'm not so sure. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. You must read this. Those words just hung in the air. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a warning. I picked up the diary. It felt heavier than it looked, like it was weighted down with a decade of silence. I thanked him and walked out of the cafe, clutching the book to my chest like I was holding a ghost. For 3 days, that diary just sat on my coffee table, basically staring at me. I'd circle it like it was going to bite. A part of me was terrified to open it. In my head, my memory of my mom was this perfect thing. What if this diary showed me a woman I didn't know? I was afraid to wake the sleeping dragon of my grief. But Mr. Harrison's words, "You must read this," kept ringing in my ears. He'd heard fear in my mother's voice. I couldn't just ignore that. So on the 3rd night, with a glass of wine for backup, I sat down, took a deep breath, and opened the clasp. The first page was dated 30 years ago, right before she met my dad. Her handwriting was that same beautiful script from all my birthday cards. The first few entries were exactly what I'd expected. Thoughts on books, frustrations with art class. It was her. It was the mom I knew, and I felt a wave of relief. I read for an hour, smiling and crying, just feeling her in the room with me again. Then I turned a page, and the tone changed completely. October 12th. Robert took me to the observatory. He's so different from anyone I've ever met. So steady. But Carol came along, uninvited. She has this way of inserting herself into my life, like a shadow I can't shake. She flirted with him all night, so openly. It was humiliating. Robert just laughed it off, but it made me sick. The way she looks at him, it's like a hunger. I keep telling myself it's just sisterly jealousy. I hope that's all it is. I froze. I had to read it again, and then a 3rd time. Carol! Of course, it was Carol. Her sickly sweet act after Mom died suddenly felt so much more sinister. My heart started to pound. I kept reading. The next few entries were about her falling in love with my dad, but Carol was always there in the background, like a wrong note in a beautiful song. November 5th. Robert and I had a huge fight. I found a movie ticket in his coat pocket for a film he said he didn't want to see. He claimed he went with a work friend, but I know he was lying. He can't look me in the eye when he lies. Later, Carol mentioned how much she loved that exact movie. A cold dread washed over me. It's too awful to even think about. She's my sister. He's the man I love. I must be going crazy. My hands were shaking. This wasn't teenage drama. This was real, adult fear. I could feel her anxiety pouring off the page. The perfect image I had of her was starting to crack. I felt sick to my stomach, like the floor was falling out from under me. I flipped forward, desperate to know more. The pages flew by, a blur of script detailing a growing nightmare. She wrote about money Carol borrowed and never gave back, about my father becoming distant and secretive, about the constant feeling of being manipulated by the two people she was supposed to trust most. And then I found the entry that broke me. It was written about a year after I was born. June 21st. I know. I'm not guessing anymore. I'm not crazy. I know. I came home early from the gallery to surprise Robert. I did. I found them. In our bed. My sister and my husband. The sight is burned into my mind forever. There was no yelling. Just silence. Carol at least looked ashamed. She grabbed her clothes and ran. Robert just stood there. He couldn't even look at me. The worst part wasn't the betrayal. The worst part was that I wasn't even surprised. I think I'd known for a long time. I can leave and destroy my own heart and Lena's world. Or I can stay and live with this poison. For my daughter, I have to find a way to stay. But I will never, ever forget. I dropped the diary. I couldn't breathe. A strangled sob tore out of my throat, but it wasn't for my mother's death. It was a raw scream for her life. For the agony she lived with for almost 30 years. My father. My aunt. In our bed. The image was so disgusting it felt like a punch to the gut. The polite, distant man and the doting, sweet aunt were complete frauds. Our entire family was built on the most disgusting lie. The cold knot I'd been carrying in my stomach for a decade finally had a name: betrayal. I didn't sleep. The rest of the night was a waking nightmare fueled by coffee and a rage so cold and pure it felt like a shard of ice in my chest. I picked the diary back up, but my tears were gone, replaced by a chilling clarity. The woman in these pages wasn't just a victim. She was a fighter, trapped for my sake. She stayed for me. That realization didn't just break my heart. It forged it into something hard and sharp. I kept reading, but now I was an investigator looking for clues. The affair wasn't a one-time thing. It was a disease that infected their entire marriage. My mother's entries became less emotional and more like a detective's notes. She documented their lies, their secret meetings, the looks they shared at family dinners. She was building a case. Then, the diary shifted to money. May 10th, 10 years before her death. My father's inheritance finally came through. It's a lot. I've met with my advisor and set up a completely separate trust, one that only I control. It's for Lena. All of it. Robert has become so reckless with our money, and I know Carol is encouraging it. I have to guard this money for Lena. It's her independence, her escape from this family's poison. I've hidden all the paperwork. They can never know the full extent of my fortune. My fists clenched. A separate trust. An inheritance I never knew about. The money she promised me. It was real. And they stole it. The complicated finances, the risky investment, all lies. They didn't just cheat on my mother, they robbed me. They stole my future, my security, my mother's last gift. Her final entries were terrifying. Her handwriting got weaker, shakier. She knew she was dying. August 3rd, 2 months before her death. The diagnosis is a death sentence. I see the look in their eyes. Robert's sadness is there, but there's something else behind it. And Carol, she's a vulture circling. She's already measuring the drapes for when I'm gone. They think they're going to get everything. They don't know about the trust. I met with my lawyer, Mr. Gable, today. He has the only copy of the real documents. He knows only Lena is the beneficiary. He will protect her. Mr. Gable. Her lawyer. I didn't know a Mr. Gable. After she died, all the legal stuff was handled by a new firm Carol had helpfully recommended. The very last entry was just a few lines, scrawled by a hand that could barely hold the pen. September 15th. He knows. Robert found a letter from Gable. He confronted me. His face, it wasn't anger. It was cold, calculating greed. He demanded details. I refused. I feel so weak. I'm afraid. Not of dying. I'm afraid for Lena. I should have left him 30 years ago. God forgive me. And that was it. The rest of the pages were blank. My mother died 3 weeks later. The story was complete. My father and my aunt weren't just cheaters, they were thieves. They waited for my mother to die, and then they systematically stole my inheritance. The new lawyers, the modest trust fund, it was all an act to hide their crime. They left me just enough to keep me quiet, while they lived like kings on my mother's money. The vacations, Carol's designer clothes, my dad's fancy cars, it was all bought with my money. The time for tears was over. The grief had burned away, leaving something cold and unbending in its place. A purpose. They had counted on me being the sad, quiet daughter, too lost in grief to notice. They underestimated me, and they underestimated my mother. She had left me a map, a weapon, and I was going to use it to burn their entire world to the ground. I woke up the next morning a completely different person. The soft, grieving daughter was gone. I was all ice and fury now. My mission was simple: justice. Not just for me, but for the mother who suffered in silence for so long. And my revenge wasn't going to be a messy fight. It was going to be a slow, public demolition. First, I had to find Mr. Gable, her lawyer. I prayed he was still alive. A quick search showed he'd retired, but I got a number for his retirement community in Florida. My heart pounded as I dialed. An elderly but sharp voice answered. "Gable speaking." "Mr. Gable," I said, my voice steady. "My name is Lena Carter. I'm Eleanor Carter's daughter." There was a long pause, then a heavy sigh. "I've been waiting for this call for 10 years, Miss Carter. I am so sorry." He told me everything. He confirmed the multi-million-dollar trust. He said that after my mother died, my father and Carol showed up with a new lawyer and a document, supposedly signed by my mom in her final days, giving them control of everything. Gable knew it was a forgery. He fought it, but they buried him in lawsuits, using my mother's own money against him. They threatened his reputation, and eventually he had to back down. But he kept the original trust documents, hoping that one day I'd come looking. "They have a copy," he said. "But I have the original, notarized document, and a signed statement from your mother about her fears. It's yours." This was it. The cannon. The diary was the fuse, but this was the heavy artillery. For the next 6 months, my full-time job was revenge. Gable put me onto a forensic accountant, a ruthless woman named Diana, who was a genius at finding hidden money. We pulled 10 years of bank records, credit card statements, everything. And we found it all. We saw them consolidate my mother's assets. We saw them sell off her favorite stocks. We saw huge consulting fees paid from the estate to a shell company that led right back to Carol. We saw the down payment for my dad's condo, the money for Carol's cruises, the 5-figure management expenses. They paid themselves every month. They hadn't just stolen it, they had gorged on it. While they were telling me a $50,000 business loan was too risky, they were living like royalty. The fury in my chest burned hotter with every receipt. But I didn't just want to win in court. That was too quiet. They humiliated my mother in the dark for 30 years. I was going to humiliate them in the spotlight. I needed a stage, and I knew the perfect one. Every year, on the anniversary of my mom's death, Carol and my father hosted the Eleanor Vance Carter Foundation Gala. It was a black-tie charity event where they'd get on stage and talk about my mother's generous spirit. It was their masterpiece of hypocrisy. And this year, it was going to be my theater. Okay, quick pause. If you're as shocked as I was, you're going to want to see how this ends. Hit subscribe, because trust me, the finale is something else. The night of the gala was surreal. The ballroom was packed with the city's elite, all sipping champagne and donating to a fake foundation. Carol was in her element, wearing a glittering red dress, laughing loudly. My father stood beside her, playing the part of the distinguished, grieving husband. They had no idea they were the guests of honor at their own public execution. I showed up late, wearing a simple black dress. When Carol saw me, she rushed over. "Lena, darling." I was so worried. "You look lovely." So simple. Classic Carol. "I wouldn't miss it for the world, Carol," I said, my voice like ice. "I'm actually hoping to say a few words about Mom tonight." Surprise, then delight, flashed across her face. "Oh, darling, of course. That's wonderful. Perfect." An hour later, they were on stage. After their usual phony speech, Carol announced, And now a special surprise. My dear niece, Lena, would like to share a few words. Polite applause followed me to the stage. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, but my focus was only on the two people by the podium. I could see the smug look on Carol's face. She thought this was her victory. I took the mic. Thank you, Aunt Carol. Thank you all for being here to honor my mother. I started warm, sharing a few happy memories. I saw people in the audience tearing up. I let that warmth settle for a moment. For 10 years, I continued, my voice turning to steel, I believed a certain story about my mother's legacy. A story of complicated finances and a small estate. But recently, I found something that told a different story. I found her diary. A hush fell over the room. I saw Carol's smile vanish. My father went rigid, and her diary told me a story of a 30-year betrayal. Right on cue, the giant screen behind them, which had been showing a photo of my mother, switched. It was now a scanned page of her diary, the entry about finding them in her bed, blown up for everyone to see. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. I read the entry aloud, my voice clear and steady. Carol's face was sheet white. My father looked like he'd been turned to stone. My mother stayed for me, I said, locking my eyes on them. She endured this, but the betrayal didn't stop there. The slide changed again. This time, it was the original trust document from Mr. Gable, showing a net worth of over $15 million, with me as the only beneficiary. More gasps. People were turning to stare at Carol and my father. This was my mother's legacy for me, I said. A legacy that somehow disappeared after she died. The next slide was a forgery they used, with my mother's weak signature next to a strong, healthy one from a year before. The difference was undeniable. And how was this legacy spent? I asked the silent, horrified room. The slideshow began. Bank statements, credit card bills for luxury cruises, photos of them on vacation, property deeds. Diana had turned their decade of greed into a 5-minute PowerPoint of their downfall. You didn't just let her die, I said, my voice low and full of venom. You waited. You circled like vultures. You stole her money, my money, and you used it to build this disgusting, fake life, all while standing on her grave pretending to honor her. Carol was hyperventilating. My father just stared at the floor, his face gray with shame. I delivered the final line. This foundation is a fraud. This family is a fraud. My mother's true legacy isn't generosity. It's a story of survival. And my tribute to her tonight is the truth. I put the microphone down. Dead silence. No one clapped. They just stared at the two broken figures on the stage. I walked away without a single look back. I walked out of that ballroom and took my first clean breath in months. My phone started exploding with calls and texts, but I ignored them all. I went home and slept for 12 hours. The next morning, the story was everywhere, at least in the high society circles they cared so much about. Their social standing was annihilated overnight. The legal battle was short and brutal. Faced with the diary, the original documents, and all the financial evidence, they had no choice but to settle to avoid criminal charges. I saw them one last time, in my lawyer's conference room. They looked shattered. Carol had aged 20 years. She tried to apologize. Lena, we never meant. Don't. I cut her off, my voice flat. You never meant to get caught. That's it. My father never said a word. He wouldn't even look at me. The man whose approval I once desperately wanted was now a complete stranger. They agreed to everything. They had to pay back the full amount of the trust, plus interest. The foundation was dissolved. They had to sell everything. They were ruined. I never spoke to either of them again. I heard my father move to a small apartment somewhere. Carol just vanished. I didn't care enough to find out where. They were ghosts from a life I had burned to the ground. It's been a year since that night. The money, an absurd amount, is in my account. For a while I couldn't touch it. It felt like it was soaked in pain. But then I realized it was my mother's final gift. Her last act of protection. So I used it. I expanded my business, set up scholarships in her name, and started a real foundation to help young artists like she always did. I decided to turn their poison into something good. Did I find peace? Yes, but not the soft, gentle kind. It's a hard one, quiet stillness. It's the peace that comes from taking back control, from speaking the truth, and from refusing to be the victim in someone else's story. I lost my family, but in the process I found myself. I look in the mirror now and I see my mother's strength. I see the woman who fought quietly for years, and I see the daughter who finished the fight for her. Some wounds never totally heal. The memory of my mother is now mixed with a deep sadness for the life she had to live. But it's also filled with so much respect. I freed her from her secrets, and in doing that, I finally freed myself. My life is my own now, built on her truth, not their lies. And that's a legacy worth fighting for. So, tell me in the comments, was justice served, or did I go too far? What would you have done? And don't forget to subscribe. You won't want to miss the stories we have coming up next. You never know what secrets are out there just waiting to be uncovered.